Hey guys, today I'm going to teach you how to make this dress step by step. This is the Roxy Dress pattern. This pattern is available for purchase at the link in my bio. Comes in sizes extra small through 3XL and comes in AO, US letter, and A4. This dress is super low cut with that pointed top. It has a mesh center and comes fully lined and has boning. There's a mermaid skirt, and you can see I have one slit. You can also close this slit for no slits or make it with 2 slits. It's your choice. Please let me know if you guys have any questions, and once you download your pattern, you can cut out your pieces and let's start sewing. So the first thing you're going to do once you have all of your pieces cut out is we are going to start with the top, and we are going to add interfacing to our top pieces minus that mesh piece. Now you can see I'm working with a lot of sequins. You want to put your interfacing on your main fabric. I am putting it on my lining, as you can see here, only because I have all of those sequins. But if you don't, put your interfacing on your main fabric to add structure, and that's step number 1. Once you've ironed on all your interfacing, I'm going to lay out my top pieces minus that mesh piece, and we're going to go side by side. We won't connect the center until the very end. So I'm going to start with my center back and my side back. I'm going to place those right sides facing and pin into place. And then when I go and sew these down, we have 1/2 inch seam allowance along the whole pattern, so make sure you sew with 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once that's done, I'm going to take that piece and I'm going to connect my side back to my side front. I'm going to place right sides facing, pin into place, and then sew down. Once that's sewn, we're going to have something that looks like this. We're going to do the same thing with our center front top piece. We're going to put that to our side front, place those right sides facing, pin in place, and then sew down. After this, you have one side completely done. We are just going to repeat those exact same steps 3 times. I say 3 because we're going to do our other side of our main fabric, and we're going to do both sides of our lining. You can see here I've got one side of my lining done. I'm going to do the other, the exact same steps until you've got 4 pieces done. Once you've got those done, we are just going to press everything flat. I do have a tailoring ham if you have something similar or just a curved surface, so that way you can get that center seam really, really flat and nice. Don't forget we're pressing the main fabric and the lining pieces. Once you've done this, set your lining aside. I'm going to flip these to the inside, and I'm going to add my boning channel in that center side seam right there. So I'm going to grab my sew-in boning, and I'm going to measure till I have 3/4 an inch from the bottom and 3/4 an inch from the top. And then I'm going to cut this and make sure I cut an identical bone, so you have 2 of these for both of your seams. Once I've got those ready, I'm just going to make sure they're the right size. I'm going to attach them right to that seam, and we are sewing this onto the seam allowance, and I'm going to show you guys what I mean by that. I take this over to my sewing machine, and I am sewing this onto the seam allowance, so you won't actually see any of the sewing on the outside, and you can kind of see that here. It's a little hard to tell because my thread is yellow, but this is sewn onto the seam allowance. And then I'm going to flip this and do it on the other side. When you do this technique, it allows so that there isn't any sewing visible on the outside. It's great if you have sequins or beading, and it's a little bit more of a couture technique, so that way you don't have your boning sewing lines on the front part of your garment. Now that boning is sewn into my seam allowance, we are going to take our center mesh piece, and we're going to attach this, and we're going to go side by side. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to pin it up against the front of my top, so on the right side of the top. Pin this into place, and then we will sew it down. Once that's sewn, we are going to repeat those exact same steps of adding our mesh. I'm going to take the side that's already sewn, place it right sides facing, and I'm going to take the mesh and pin it to the right side of the opposite side that hasn't been sewn yet. So make sure at the very bottom they get very close. Make sure you're pushing that seam allowance out of the way from your other top that you're not currently pinning, so that you're not sewing that on accident. You're just sewing the mesh onto the other side of your top. And once you've done that, it should look like this. Now we're going to work on our lining. So what we're going to do is do this side by side. So I'm going to take one side and flip it. We are only working with the side that is facing up. I'm going to grab my lining and I'm going to place this right side's facing and pin it only to the side of the fabric that is facing up. Now I'm pinning this starting at about 3/4 of an inch. We want to leave a little bit unsewn. So leave about 3/4 of an inch unsewn, and that's why you see me pinning there. And then I'm going to pin all the way up and around to the whole top, again, of the right side of the top that's facing up. Make sure you align your seam allowances. Push the top that you folded over out of the way. Make sure you don't accidentally sew that. And we're just going to pin all the way around the top. Make sure all those seams are aligning for our lining and our main fabric. And once that's done, we are going to sew that down, again, leaving that 3/4 of an inch at the bottom out. Once that's all sewn, we are just going to trim off some of that seam allowance. I like to cut that very top at 2 angles, so I make sure that's really pointy. And then at the curve, I'm just going to cut little slits. This will help everything lay flatter. At the back, I'm actually going to trim off the seam allowance. And then at that center front, I actually like to leave my seam allowance. You can also do an extra bone here if you want some more support. If you have heavy fabric, it's not necessarily necessary, but you can add another bone. Then we're just gonna flip this right sides out, as you can see. You can do a top stitch. I have so much sequins on this, I'm not going to do a top stitch, but you can also add an optional top stitch to make sure everything is sitting nice and flat. And now we're just gonna repeat the exact same thing for the other side. We're going to flip the side that we're not sewing down and out of the way, and we're gonna take our lining, and again, we're just pinning this to the side where the fabric is facing up. And I like to leave 3/4 inch at the bottom again, and then we're gonna pin all the way around, aligning our lining seams to our main fabric seams, and we're gonna sew this into place. And then trimming it the same, I'm gonna trim off the end, cut little slits at our curve, and then I like to cut the top part at an angle, and then flip this inside out. And we have got our top pretty much ready. We're gonna set this aside, and we're gonna get started on our skirt pieces. Now, I mentioned in the beginning, this skirt can be made with 1 slit, no slits, or 2 slits. There's a mark on the pattern. You can see I have a tiny little red dot right there because I'm doing 1 slit that is on the wearer's right side. So for this, I am just going to pin only to where that red dot is. If you're not doing a slit, you're gonna pin all the way down. If you're doing a slit on the opposite side, you'll do that. If you're doing a slit on both sides, you'll only pin to where you want the slit to stop. And then we're gonna sew that portion up. Once that's been sewn, it's gonna look like this. We're gonna grab our opposite side. Since I'm only doing 1 slit, this one I'm going to pin all the way down the length of the dress. If you were doing another slit, you would stop where that slit mark is on your pattern, or you could make it lower or higher, however you choose to do your slit. But we're gonna pin this all the way down since I'm only doing 1, and then sew this into place. Once that's been sewn, I'm going to grab my 2 back pieces, and I know it's a little hard to see on camera, but I do have my darts marked in chalk. So you wanna mark your darts, and what I'm going to do is place my darts together with the right sides facing. So the inside of my fabric is facing up right now, and I'm going to pin both of the darts on my 2 back pieces, and I'm gonna sew those down into place once I have them pinned. Once those are both sewn down on the right side of the fabric, you'll see they look like this. I'm just gonna do 1 at a time. I'm gonna grab one of my back pieces and align it to the same side of my front piece that's now been sewn. You should have 3 front pieces that are now 1 and sewn together. And I'm gonna pin this all the way down the remainder of the skirt and then sew into place. Once that was sewn, I flipped my skirt over, so this is the front right here, and I'm gonna grab my other back piece, and I'm going to place those right sides facing, and again, I'm just going to pin all the way down the entirety of the skirt to the very bottom, and then sew this into place. So once you're done with it, your skirt should look like a full skirt with just the back, the center back will remain open. Once all of that's done, I'm going to repeat those exact same steps for my lining. So we're gonna recreate that skirt, The only thing you will do different is if you are doing one slit, make sure your slit is on the opposite side for your lining. So mine will now be on the left side because these are going to be right sides facing. So make sure you do that. You're going to do your front and then do your darts in the back, connect your back to your front, and then we are going to iron the seams on both our main fabric and our lining fabric. You can see I'm using a tailoring hammer there. Use anything you have to get those curves just nice and neat looking. Now that we have our two skirts done and pressed, we're gonna grab our top and we're gonna add these to this. We're gonna do this with just the main fabric to the main fabric and lining to the lining. So I'm gonna grab my main fabric skirt and I'm going to place this right sides facing with my top, and I am just pinning. This is why we left that 3/4 of an inch. You can see it's not sewn down to the lining. I'm going to pin just the main fabric of the top to the main fabric skirt that I have, again with right sides facing. Make sure you align all of your seams, and then once I've aligned the seams, I like to go in and kind of fill everything in. Make sure everything is looking really nice, ends are matching ends. And then again, I'm gonna pull this apart so you can see we're just doing the main fabric to the main fabric. The lining is not getting pinned or sewed just yet. Once I sew that down, it's gonna look like this. We're gonna repeat those exact same steps with the lining. And again, we're just pinning the lining to the lining. We are not pinning the main fabric at all. So we're gonna align all of those seams, make sure we're not pinning our main fabric, and we are just going to pin everything in place to make sure it's looking nice, and then sew it down. Now that both your main fabric and your lining skirts have been connected, we are just going to trim off that seam allowance so these can sit a little flatter, and we'll do that for both the lining and the main fabric. Now I'm going to shake all this out and we are going to work on our slit. So I'm going to take this and make sure the fabrics are right sides facing my lining and my main fabric. We're going to align that slit and we are going to pin those again right sides facing. So make sure that seam is aligning, and I'm going to pin this all the way down to the bottom of the skirt on both sides. And then once I've got that pinned, I will sew it into place. Once that's done, I'm going to attach the seam allowance to the lining. This is going to help the fabric not roll out, and I'll show you how I'm doing that on my sewing machine, but the seam allowance is getting sewn to the lining. So I'm going to take this to my sewing machine, make it flat, and I'm just sewing down all of that seam allowance away from the main fabric and onto the lining. And again, this is just going to help the lining not to roll out on your slit. Once that's done, I'm just going to give this a nice press. Now I've got my dress turned over to the open back. We are just gonna work on our zipper. We're nearing the home stretch here. So I'm gonna take my zipper, I'm gonna unzip this, and I'm going to take this, and it's just gonna go to my main fabric. So I'm gonna move my lining out of the way. We'll do that later. And I'm gonna take my zipper and I'm gonna take it so that the teeth are facing towards the center back now. Flip it so that they are facing away from the center back. And I'm gonna pin this just to my main fabric, all the way down to about an inch till the end of the zipper. I think I left a little bit more on this one because my zipper was extra long, but you want to leave a little bit of a tail at the end of your zipper. Once that's sewn up, I'm going to grab a marker. I'm going to zip up my zipper, and we're just going to mark where the waist and the end where the tail starts on one side of the zipper so that I know these are aligning. So I'm going to grab a marker. I'm just going to make a tiny little dot where the waist is, and then I'm going to make a tiny little dot where the tail starts so I can make sure my other side is the exact same. Once that's marked, I'm going to repeat the exact same steps I did for the other side. So I'm taking the teeth, facing them away from the center back. I'm going to make sure that dot goes right where the waist of my dress seam is. So that way I know my zipper is aligning when I go to zip it up. And then I'm going to go and continue all the way down, and then I'm going to stop pinning right where my other dot is. And again, we're just pinning the main fabric. We are not pinning the lining just yet. And we'll sew this into place. And now before you move on, make sure you zip up that zipper, make sure everything is looking nice. Now you can see I've unzipped. I am taking my lining and I'm pulling it out. You kind of have to maneuver this a little bit. I am taking it up and over so that the right side of my lining is hitting the right side of my main fabric, and that zipper is sandwiched in between with the teeth still facing away from the center back. And I'm gonna pin this. As I'm pinning, I wanna make sure those waist seam align. So the waist seam of my lining and the waist seam of my main fabric should hit right at the same place. You can see I'm pinning that now. And we're gonna pin this all the way down. And you'll see when we flip this inside out, you'll have a completely seamless zipper with the teeth sandwiched in between your main fabric and your lining, and all those raw edges hidden in between. This is what it's gonna look like once you've sewn it. I always call this the fortune cookie. Once I flip this inside out, you'll see what I mean by all those raw edges are hidden and you just have your zipper. We're gonna repeat this for the other side the exact same way. I'm pulling my lining up and over, having it meet my main fabric with the right sides facing and that zipper in between, again with the teeth still facing away from the center back. And I'm gonna pin this all the way down. Again, I'm ending my lining right where I ended the main fabric. So you should still have that tail of the zipper that sticks out. Once I have this pinned, I'm gonna sew that down, and then we should have our lining attached to our main fabric for our zipper on both sides. Again, before you move on to the next step, make sure you zip up that zipper, make sure everything is looking okay. And now we are just going to close up the bottom of our dress. We're gonna do this for both our main fabric and our lining. So I'm gonna flip my dress inside out. I'm going to put my main fabric facing each other. And when I do this, I'm gonna make sure I pull that tail out of the way. Also when I'm sewing, you want to really sew right up to where the zipper sewing ends. But I'm gonna start pinning these together all the way down the remainder of the skirt, and we're gonna close up that main fabric. Once that's done, I'm gonna flip my dress the other way, and I'm gonna do the exact same thing for my lining. I'm gonna pin those right sides facing right up to where that tail, where the sewing ends for the zipper. Make sure you're sewing right up under there, and I'm just gonna pin and sew all the way down the remainder of the skirt part of the dress. The very last step is we are just going to hem our dress. So you're gonna hem your lining and your main fabric. I like to do these separately with just a rolled hem. I'm actually not going to hem my main fabric. As you can see, I have all those sequins, but I'm just gonna take this to my sewing machine, hem my lining, and we are just going to do a rolled hem all the way through. This is your very last step. Please let me know if you guys have any questions. I hope you enjoy your new dress. I'm so glad you decided to make a custom dress for yourself or for someone else. Please follow along for next month's pattern release.